Good day, everyone. My name is Barb Simmons. I'm the Director of the Community Supports Policy Branch at the Ministry of Community and Social Services. My branch is responsible for developing policy related to community services that help adults live independently, including adults with developmental disabilities, as well as women who have experienced violence, Indigenous communities, and individuals who are deaf, deafened, hard of hearing, and deafblind. I'm pleased to be here today as the moderator of this webinar. The webinar will include a presentation and a panel discussion on a project funded by the Ministry of Community and Social Services and led by the Eastern Community Network of Specialized Care. We're really pleased at MCSS to be involved in this important work, which will provide some new resources for professionals working in the justice system. The resources can assist the justice sector in working with people with developmental disabilities, and the key resource is the Developmental Disabilities Justice Toolkit. My staff have worked with Lisa Holmes, the project lead, and her staff, along with ministry partners that are part of an interministerial mental health and justice committee, to review and provide feedback on the contents of the toolkit. We're very grateful. Particular shout out of thanks to Lisa for her hard work on leading the development and piloting, testing, and subsequent rollout of the toolkit. Our partner ministries on the committee include the Ministries of Health and Long-Term Care, Community Safety and Corrections, Attorney General, and Children and Youth Services. So this toolkit represents one of many ways over the last year that MCSS is working with partners in the justice system to ensure individuals with a developmental disability receive the services and supports that best meet their needs. Before we start the actual presentation, I'm just going to mention a few housekeeping items. There will be a Q&A period at the end of the webinar. To ask a question, type your questions into the chat box, and we ask that you hold your questions until the panel discussion actually begins, and then we'll sort of pull them up and address them in sequence. We will try our best to get to the questions, but we do have some limited time on this, so we may need to follow up by posting additional information on the website or through email following the webinar. The webinar will also be recorded and distributed to all of the participants by email, and the PowerPoint presentation will be made available, and it includes contact information for follow-up and additional questions. So we're hoping to keep the channels of communication open, not just during the webinar, but after as well. Finally, at the end of the presentation, HSJCC will be sending you a link to a brief evaluation survey on the webinar. I want to thank HSJCC for hosting the webinar and their important ongoing contributions to supporting vulnerable groups, including people with developmental disabilities. The HSJCC is doing great work across its 42 local committees, its 14 regional committees, and 1 provincial committee. Each HSJCC is a voluntary collaboration between health and social service organizations, community health and addictions organizations, and partners from the justice sector, including Crown attorneys, judges, police services, and correctional services providers. Lisa Holmes, our project lead, will lead the presentation, sharing knowledge and introducing the resources that may be helpful to you. You will also have an opportunity to hear Lisa speak about the experiences of one of her staff members, a dual diagnosis justice case manager, and how these resources supported her. We're also accompanied by Staff Sergeant Sharon Brown and Katie Almond, who is a probation and parole officer, who along with Lisa will be our panel members today. They have all played a big part in supporting the development and testing of the Justice Toolkit. There will be an opportunity toward the end of the webinar for those listening to hear from and ask questions of all the panel members who have been involved in the pilot to test resources developed. I'm now going to hand it over to Lisa Holmes for her presentation.
Great. Thank you, Barb. So yes, my name is Lisa Holmes. I'm the manager for the Eastern Community Network of Specialized Care, and I was the project lead for the Developmental Disabilities Awareness in the Criminal Justice System project. So the goal of this initiative was to build capacity and share knowledge within the justice sector about people with developmental disabilities in order to foster better understanding and identifying and effectively communicating and interacting with these individuals who come into contact with the law. So just a few things to consider as we head into the presentation. In Ontario, about 3% of the population will have a developmental disability, and it's estimated that approximately 10% of those individuals will come into conflict with the law. So I guess a couple of things to keep in mind before going forward is that research has not established a link between developmental disability and a predisposition for criminal behavior. And early identification of victims, witnesses, suspects, or offenders who may have a developmental disability is the most significant issue for justice and law enforcement professionals. And I think also as well, the adaptation of communication and interviewing approaches by criminal justice professionals can lead to more options for diversion and more opportunities for the individual with a developmental disability to effectively participate in the process with appropriate supports and services to participate in the process. From their point of first encounter through to arrest, court admission, and then to criminal justice facility and community supervision. So when we talk about prevalence, the prevalence rates really vary. So as you can see from this slide, research shows that between 2 and 40% of adult offenders with a developmental disability will be in the justice system. It's really hard to determine prevalence from existing studies because they all collect information differently from different points in the system. As well, there are different definitions used for developmental disability. But I think the one thing that is apparent is that there really is a general sense of overrepresentation within the system. Prevalence of youth with developmental disabilities within the justice system might even be higher. Research shows that there is an even higher prevalence than in the adult population, or at least there's a perception of a higher prevalence. We're often questioned around the prevalence of those with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, or FASD. Approximately 1% of people living in Canada have FASD, and it's estimated that approximately 35% of individuals with FASD have been in jail or prison at some time during their lifespan. So they are certainly overrepresented as well. Those with ASD, or autism spectrum disorder, about 1% of the Canadian population is affected by ASD. And in the justice system, numbers range between 1 and 5%, with higher rates of ASD found in forensic hospitals. And those tend to be individuals with higher functioning autism or Asperger's, and their reason for being in forensic facilities is very much the same as others with mental health issues. So we're talking, lack of access to services or service gaps, or other services not being available for them in the community. So the link between developmental disabilities and particular types of offenses can be quite controversial. I think what research will show us is that the majority of offenses tend to be misdemeanors, public nuisances. Individuals with DD are less likely to commit what are known as the white-collar crimes or traffic offenses. They're often involved with the justice system as a result of verbal threats or physical aggression, and they tend to be more reactionary to a situation as opposed to premeditated. And I think what you'll find is that typically these offenses are more likely to be against other individuals with a developmental disability or against staff or family. So with the feeling that there was an overrepresentation of individuals with a developmental disability within the justice system, the Ministry of Community and Social Services, along with other ministry partners, conducted a knowledge gap analysis on individuals with developmental disability and interactions with the justice sector. As part of this, there were 3 gaps identified. The first being a general lack of awareness of developmental disabilities within those working in the justice system. That there were challenges in, first of all, identifying individuals with a developmental disability, and that there were challenges in communicating with those with a developmental disability. So with those concerns in mind, the Interministerial Mental Health and Justice Committee, which is comprised of the 5 ministries that Barb referenced earlier, it was identified that perhaps there should be a project around creating more awareness within the justice system. So MCSS became the lead ministry for this initiative, and they contacted the Community Networks of Specialized Care to see if we'd be interested in developing this proposal. Primarily because the community networks are spread across the province and have a mandate and role for working with individuals with developmental disabilities across the various sectors. So my region, the Eastern region, was sort of nominated to put forward a proposal. And so we put forward the proposal, and it was approved back in December of 2014. So when we look at when we started this project and we looked at the impact of the knowledge gaps, some of the concerns we had were that individuals with DD were at risk of not being identified for pre-arrest diversion or court diversion for which they're eligible. So if somebody's not being identified as having a developmental disability, it's not being picked up that they would qualify for the mental health diversions. Also means they're probably not being linked to the supports and services which will benefit them, either throughout the justice process or post-incarceration. And I think what's most concerning for me is if we're not identifying individuals with developmental disabilities, they're not being communicated with in a way in which they can understand and comprehend. And that can have some serious implications as people are being asked to agree to such things as bail conditions, probation conditions, being asked whether or not they're going to plead guilty within the court system. So there's some significant concerns as people are not being communicated in an appropriate manner. So when we looked at how we would address these gaps and figure out a way of better informing the justice system, we determined that we would develop a variety of educational and awareness materials on developmental disabilities that were specifically developed for professionals working in law enforcement. And so a lot of materials were out there, but they weren't geared towards law enforcement and justice officials. And, quite frankly, what we've been told is that there's just too much material out there, and when you need the information, you need to be able to find it quickly and easily. So our target audiences for this project were right across the justice system, from police through the courts, probation, parole, youth probation, as well as correctional services and youth justice officers. There were three components to the project. We began with a research project. There was the development of training videos and a toolkit and resource guide. So let's talk a little bit more about each of those components. So the research component involved a literature review, and that was a comprehensive literature review, not only of Canadian literature, but from literature from around the world. And we also looked at analysis of the RIMH database. And really the purpose of that literature review and the analysis of the database was really to validate the information that we also heard through key informant interviews and focus groups. And it was to help us develop a profile of individuals who were most likely to come into conflict with the justice system. So our research team was comprised of Dr. Ron Hoffman, who at the time was with Ontario Police College, Dr. Lynn Martin of Lakehead University, and Dr. Greg Brown from Nipissing University. So as mentioned, we conducted a number of key informant interviews and focus groups, and we really received a lot of information. We interviewed everyone from police officers to judges, crime attorneys, duty counsel. We met with groups who had interest in the area, family groups, consumer groups, basically just trying to find out what were the issues, what needs and information resources would be helpful as well. So the training video, there are 3 training videos that were developed as part of this project. They're 15 to 20 minutes sort of in total. Each one ranges about 10 to 12 minutes. And they're primarily geared towards law enforcement and other professionals working in the justice system. I think they're most useful probably by police and correctional officers. We were told early on by the police we interviewed that videos were the preferred training format. It's what they're accustomed to. So we actually worked in partnership with the Ontario Police Training Video Alliance, and we worked with a company that has worked with the OPTBA as well previously, a company named Omni Video. And our project was led by Patty Hancock, who has experience in mental health justice and dual diagnosis. Unique thing about the videos are that they are based on real-life scenarios that we heard from those working in the field. The vignettes use active law enforcement officers. Kingston Police provided us with the use of some of their officers to be in the videos, and we also used individuals with developmental disabilities. The videos were not scripted. They were given sort of the context for the video, and they were acted out as they would see would be quite natural. So I think the quality of the videos is actually very good. The topics, again, we listened to what were the key issues that police and correctional staff found were necessary, that they were missing information on, and those were identification, communication, de-escalation strategies, and referral to community support. So the videos are available in both English and French, and they can be played all at once or in individual segments. So the other product of the project was the online toolkit. The toolkit is really the meat of the project. It's an interactive PDF. It was developed that way so that it can be easily shared, viewed. Once again, we heard that if we produced a paper document, it wasn't going to be helpful because it's not always easily accessible. It becomes outdated. So the interactive PDF was our solution. It's able to be shared because it's an Adobe PDF, so it can be emailed, it can be downloaded, it can be viewed online from the website where it's posted. So it just makes it really useful. When it's open, it actually functions like a website. So we'll just demonstrate that here. So the toolkit development was led by Susan Morris of Morris Consulting, and Susan has extensive experience in dual diagnosis and developmental disabilities. We also had an expert advisory panel that we utilized as a resource. So everything contained in the toolkit was vetted by our professionals. Again, we had actually Sharon, who's here on our panel, and Katie were both on our expert panel. We also had resources from judges, defense, Crown, mental health, developmental services. So we sort of covered end to end. We also had an expert who happened to be visiting from the UK, who was an expert in preparing individuals with developmental disabilities for the court process. So I'm just going to exit out of this and just do a quick. So this is what the toolkit looks like. We're just going to exit out. Sorry, we're having technical difficulties here. Okay, so this is what the toolkit looks like. So just, as you can see, it's very user-friendly. We have the table of contents. Everything's interactive. So anything that is highlighted in blue within the toolkit is actually a hyperlink. And the reason we've done it this way is because we were told very clearly that the information has to be quick and easy to get to. So, officers in the field and lawyers, they don't have a lot of time to be leafing through information. So we've developed it so that you can get to what you need very quickly. We've tried to make everything in here very practical, include tools that can be used in everyday jobs. So I'm just going to click through and just give you an idea for some of the So you can see each section is broken into smaller subheadings, and we've tried to keep the content fairly to the point, not a lot of reading, but anywhere, if you can go as deep as you want into the topic or keep it as basic as you want. So for example, when you're looking at, we'll go into an identification checklist here. You can see, you can dig deeper. There's lists of the type of things. This particular section will give some tips around what to look for if you're trying to identify someone early on who might have a developmental disability. So there's some tips that can be quick and easy, things to look for: speech, language, physical appearance, social behavior, those sorts of things. Back to the table of contents. Some other tips we have are around things like interview strategies and quick reference guides. You can see here we've just got some very quick tips. So if an officer is going into an interview, some strategies that they might be able to use. So we've tried to keep it quite practical. We've also included information on specific types of developmental disabilities, different disorders, and where there might be characteristics that might predispose someone to, criminal activity. So, for instance, someone with FASD, for instance, they're prone to impulsive behavior. So you might have somebody who does something without thinking of the consequences. So we also have, at the end of the toolkit, a resource guide, and that's the next section of the work that we did. So the resource guide includes local resources that justice officials would be able to use to connect someone to developmental services. So what we've done is worked with our other community network of specialized care partners to identify justice system access points in each of our regions. The reason for that being that, once again, we didn't want to have a big laundry list of contacts that weren't really going to be helpful. So we've just tried to point you in the direction of the first point of contact where you should be able to get the information you need, or at least get direction to a more appropriate service or program. So that's what you'll find within that section. So hopefully the resources contained within the toolkit are helpful. As I said, we consulted heavily with individuals working in the field to find out what would be helpful to them, which resources would be beneficial, and that's really how the toolkit was put together, the contents. And we're just going to go back to the presentation. Okay, so we're in touch with the resource guide. So we piloted the project in the Southeast last summer between June and September with municipal and provincial police, as well as others across the justice sector. And feedback from the project was very positive, actually. We found out that the most utilized sections were the section on does a person have a developmental disability, and then second most useful section was what do I do when it appears an individual has a developmental disability. I think that's really important because, as we pointed out earlier in the presentation, it's most important to identify someone with a developmental disability early on in the process. So I think it's great that people are using those sections so that they can identify, try to figure out tips and strategies for at least, and we're not saying individuals in the justice system have to diagnose someone with a developmental disability. It's really just raising a red flag that perhaps this person has a developmental disability and we should reach out for other resources. So some of the other feedback we had, some of our testimonials were that they found the toolkit to be very thorough and well organized, that they especially liked the ability to just click on what section or topic you're looking for and being routed to that section so that you didn't have to sort through a lot of information they weren't interested in. And I think probably our best feedback overall was that it was fantastic training and a go-to resource. So we've just did a quick run through of the toolkit, and we are not showing the videos because they don't broadcast well through a webcast, so our apologies, but they are available for your viewing on both the provincial HSJCC website. They're under the Our Work tab. If you scroll down to the Community Networks of Specialized Care and click on that, you will find the link there to this project. You can also find the toolkit and the videos on the Community Network website under the Specialized Services tab. And then through the coming months, our partner ministries will be rolling out the materials through their own channels. So we're just sort of getting into the launch of the materials at this point. So really, at the end of the day, what we're hoping to be the desired outcome from this project is we're really looking to increase awareness of the vulnerability and special needs of individuals with developmental disabilities who come into contact with the justice system. We're also hoping that professionals working in the justice system will have the tools and resources that will assist them in interacting with this target population. And I think as well that individuals with developmental disabilities will have a better experience going through the justice system if they're getting the supports and services that they need to assist them. And as well that individuals with developmental disabilities are not going to bear more burdensome penalties due to their developmental disability. And certainly we've seen a number of examples where people have a really rough ride through the justice system because they don't understand what's happening to them. They don't understand the process, and sometimes if they wind up in incarceration, it can be a pretty rough ride. They're very vulnerable. And I think, what we found in working on this project in particular is just building relationships across sectors, making those working in the justice system aware of developmental services and supports and what's available out there and how we can assist and work together. So I think now we'll move into the panel.
Thank you very much, Lisa. That was great. Heard it a couple of times, and I learned something every single time. And thanks again for all of the hard work that you've put into this project already in partnership with your other colleagues. So now we're going to do the panel discussion portion of the webinar. And just a reminder to folks who are watching and listening, feel free to type in any questions you have now on the panel or for the panelists at this time. And then we'll do Q&As just kind of following a bit of a panel introduction and overview. So just to start off, rather than asking all the panelists specific questions, I'll just ask Sharon and Katie each to introduce themselves, their role in the developmental service or justice sector, to explain from each of your points of view why the tools are important, and then describe how the tools have been useful to you. And I think we'll just start off with Staff Sergeant Sharon Brown.
Hi, good afternoon, and thank you very much for having me. I'm quite pleased to be here today. I am a member of the Ontario Provincial Police. I've been a police officer for 30 years now, and I work in Frontenac Detachment, and our area also covers Charlotte Lake. So we are closely associated, geographically speaking, to Kingston, but we are certainly a rural area and with a vast amount of geography. So when I first started many, many moons ago, mental health training was very limited, if it existed at all, to be perfectly honest. And it's good to see that there is better training out there for police officers to have a better understanding, because what we're finding now is that for OPP, it sometimes seems like we are the ministry of last resort. People with experiencing issues or are in crisis, they don't know who else to call but the police. And of course, when the police are called, we will certainly come. But we're not necessarily, we may be the answer at that time, but we're not necessarily the proper answer to get the person who's in crisis the proper services to help them. So when the mental health training starts to come in and it's getting better and better, and then when you have something like developmental disabilities identified as a gap, that's just another piece to the whole mental health assistance pie that gives us a greater insight as to what we could potentially be dealing with. And what that does is allows us to change our approach and adapt to the situation. It's important that these vulnerable people that we comprehend, and actually it's important that we comprehend what we're doing, but it's also even more important that the people with DD understand why we're doing what we're doing and why we're having that interaction, and how that interaction happens. For the vast majority of the cases, it's going to be success or failure based on how we approach. So when we have this toolkit, it's really, really great because it is so interactive and there's an ease of access. Now that we have mobile workstations in our cruisers, that information is now so much more easily accessed than it was rather than going back to the office and looking this information up. So, and the good part about the tools is that it is able to identify what is being presented when we're dealing with people with DD, as well as our approach. And when we went into actually what I did was I pulled an officer aside and I said, let's go into the developmental toolkit and let's see what we can find. And the key piece that he brought back to me was because we did it in a very, very short time frame, almost mimicking heading to a call. And he said the piece that he liked was the what not to do, what not to say, because it actually sort of just stuck out, and it was important to know what key phrases to try and stay away from. The other piece that we noticed, though, and this might be something that supervisors, they may want to take back to their members, is when you open up the PDF, it's 160 pages long, and that can scare people. And my request to you is don't let that daunt you, don't let that daunt your folks, because it is a wonderful resource once you actually are able to navigate through that. So if they have the heads up that yes, it's 160 pages long, but all you have to do is go to the table of contents and you will get what you need, that I think that's a key communication piece to your folks. And the table of contents is laid out really, really well. And if I'm going to be really, really picky, the only suggestion that was made was that the map that shows where the different geographic areas are, if that could be interactive with the actual links to the support services, that would make it a whole lot easier. So it's the little experiment that we did was actually very, very successful. And what we found was sections 1 and 2, as well as the reference guides, the Crook reference guide and the resources are going to be certainly helpful along the way.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Real life, real work experience. Thank you very much. I'm just going to ask Lisa if she wants to kind of chip into this part of the discussion.
So great. Yeah, so I also happen to supervise the dual diagnosis justice case manager in our region. And I can certainly tell you from her experience, the Toolkit is a resource that she can utilize in promoting to the justice professionals she's working with to help them better interact with the clients she's representing. So the dual diagnosis justice case managers are one of the resources identified in the Toolkit. There are dual diagnosis justice case managers in all regions, and they are to work within the court systems to assist individuals with developmental disabilities, not just in navigating the system, but in helping them to access the services and supports in the community that would be helpful, but as well as helping to negotiate diversions and manage diversions for those when they qualify. And I can tell you, one of the stories we've had around the dangers of not being aware of the special vulnerabilities and communication styles of someone with a developmental disability were really apparent in one of the cases that she worked on early on. So we had a client, and he'd had a number of breach of probations. He was a chronic breach of probation, and so finally the mental health court support staff in our region referred this individual over to our justice case manager. And in working with him, and looking at why he was breaching his probation, one of his probation orders was he was not to contact his mother. The key thing to know about that is up to this point where he had assaulted his mother had been his primary caregiver. She had provided all of his meals, did his laundry. He really relied on his mother for everything. So when the court put as a part of his probation that he could not contact his mother, that really put him at a disadvantage because they did that without assisting him in accessing services that might be able to replace the supports that his mother had provided to him. Additionally, he didn't really understand the word contact. So, in his mind, contact meant that he could not touch his mother. But he was regularly calling her, showing up at her house, and in his mind, that wasn't contact.
Coming to do laundry.
Right, coming to do laundry. So really what it meant was for him explaining the language in the probation order, putting some supports in place so that his mother wasn't the person he was relying on for those aspects of his life. So, that's something that our justice case managers do on a regular basis is kind of walk that line between helping to identify the vulnerabilities, connect people to the supports and services that they'll benefit from. So I guess that goes back to why it's so important, especially, for police officers, to be able to identify early on that someone might have a developmental disability, because if we can get people attached to those supports as they're entering the system, I think certainly we'll have a much better experience and people won't end up needlessly caught in that vicious cycle of the system.
Thanks, Lisa. And now I'm going to ask Katie.
Hi, I'm Katie Almond. I'm a probation parole officer. I have been doing that job for 29 years and 33 years in the justice system. I started off working in the courts and certainly have seen a lot of change happen over the years, and this Toolkit is one of the great changes that's happening. I'm also the co-chair of the Downtown Toronto HSJCC and of the Provincial Human Services and Justice Coordinating Committee. From my point of view, as I just indicated, there is a need for a tool like this because there isn't much out there. We have a lot of new staff coming into correctional services. Our training has to encompass a tremendous number of topics, and one of the challenges is finding appropriate resources with the right information So this has been an excellent opportunity. It's been an excellent opportunity to share this information with new staff, with older staff too. But because we have such a sea change in our human resources population, it's been a great opportunity to share it with new staff who have questions about how to go about interviewing clients who they may suspect have a developmental disability or they do have a diagnosis on the record. We also see a large number of clients where I work in an inner city office. We have a large number of clients with FASD and other sort of clients on the spectrum who often come into contact with the law, as Lisa pointed out, for minor offenses. And one of my issues is always, do they really understand what mens rea is? You have to have criminal intent and the act to be convicted of an offense or found guilty. And I'm not sure in many of those cases that there actually was mens rea. There was not an intent to commit a criminal act. So the tools have been useful to me in a number of ways. I've worked with the Developmental Disabilities case manager before, and I learned a lot from her. And one of the things was, as anyone who knows me will tell you, I talk fast and I talk a lot. So, and I tend to embed several questions into one sentence. And of course, a client with a developmental disability would just stare at me uncomprehendingly, justifiably so. I would start off with one question, then I would link it to another and link it to another. And because it was difficult for some of the clients to parse out which one should they answer first, they would not answer any of them. And of course, in the wrong sort of situation, or in a difficult situation, one might think of that as being the person's being obstructive or being difficult. But in fact, of course, it's because my communication style was problematic, not theirs. The other thing has been you brought this up actually, Lisa, was the use of concrete examples of probation conditions. Yes. So the client literally saw contact as being physical contact, but explaining to clients what the probation conditions mean in a less abstract and more concrete manner. Legal language is very abstract. Probation parole documents over the years have become increasingly denser, longer. When I first started, there were maybe 2 or 3 things on the document. Now it's an 8.5 by 14 double-sided document with lots of stuff on it. Some clients are of the belief that all of the conditions apply to them, when in fact that's not the case. It's only the ones that are ticked off. Yep. So I will sometimes say to them, as indicated in the toolkit, tell me in your own words what this means. We said you can't have contact with your mom. What does that mean for you? And if it's, well, it means I can go to her house, I just can't touch her, maybe the answer is no. So clarifying the abstract language and making it more concrete. One of the things that's really been clear to me is the clients with DD are really vulnerable, and not having them sit in the waiting room for an extended period of time. About 13 years ago, our ministry moved all of our youth over to what is now MCYS. The whole idea being you don't want vulnerable youth sitting in the waiting room, but the fact is that we have clients who developmentally may be very, very young, or they may be 25 or 30, but in fact are 12 or 13. They're sitting in a waiting room full of other clients who are much more street savvy and sophisticated, and they may be easily manipulated or pulled into situations that compromise their safety and security. So to ensure that when the client shows up, I see them immediately. John is here, I go get John. There's no taking another call or anything like that. And the last thing I think that it really points out to me is I'm a big proponent of the use of language. I think that in corrections, and we've started doing this a little bit, is we need to get away from referring to clients as offenders. I think it's offensive. I think it's particularly offensive with a vulnerable population. This toolkit has really highlighted, I think, the need to have this sort of approach for all vulnerable clients. We have an increasing very large number of mental health clients in the justice system, and an increasing number of elderly clients as well, who are vulnerable for a variety of reasons. So if nothing else, using the toolkit or reading through it is the cautionary tale about dealing with other vulnerable populations as well.
Thanks, Katie. That's really, really helpful. I think one of the common themes in some of the stories that we've heard and have been hearing through the pilot period has been this issue of the kind of cloak of competence, where folks with developmental disabilities can quite often be nodding and being agreeable and being outgoing and appearing to fully comprehend everything. But, as Katie's example illustrated, sometimes you need them to repeat it back to you, you need them to make their own notes, you need to highlight the key elements for them to remember, you need to find out if they have services or support workers available to them to support them in really understanding the consequences and the commitments that are getting laid down. So thank you for all of that illustrative information.
Can I just give a quick example? Sorry, if I can just jump in. I remember I brought this up at the conference and it just popped into my head. Now, clients with boundary restrictions, for example. So explaining to a client, the streets is often irrelevant, but if I use landmarks, I'll say, you know, there's that,
Right.
you know, IKEA or whatever, a big store, so maybe something that's identified. Tim
Hortons
Hortons on the corner, you know, there's a Chapters across the street. All right, you can't go to those corners, you know, that sort of thing. And then actually physically drawing out a map of that area and handing it to the client. And just to reiterate what you're saying, Barb, is the whole issue of clients will acknowledge. We have this acknowledgement of court order that they sign, that they acknowledge that they understand the conditions, but in fact, of course, they don't. It goes into the file and is used against them if there's a breach of probation charge.
Right.
So really, truly understanding that they acknowledge. Just wanted to point that out. Thanks.
Thanks. I was going to ask just a little bit, because we did talk about this a bit at the conference as well. I was going to ask about your experience with sort of connecting with services and supports through the developmental services system. Because we do have some services and supports, like adult protective service workers, who are kind of there for the purpose of almost having individual clients supported and helped through the system. And I wondered if any of you wanted to share any stories, you know, positive or negative, because we're all interested in the continuous improvement arc on this work about that.
Well, I can certainly give an example from
Lisa speaking.
Yes, from our dual diagnosis justice case manager, because often, you know, she serves as that bridge between the justice system and developmental services. And I know oftentimes we'll work alongside with staff from a developmental service agency to assist them in navigating the system with the clients that they're supporting. And we've actually had some really good success, as well as being able to negotiate diversions for individuals where we are able to link them to appropriate services that, you know, in the court system, they then deem that to be reducing the risk. You know, we've recently had some individuals where, on paper, the charges that they've had has actually made them ineligible for a diversion. But when the story and the circumstances were actually explained to the Crown Attorney and to the judge around, you know, what really led to this charge, and they realized that sometimes, you know, our folks are getting into the system, they're naive, and so on paper the charges look quite serious, but when you actually look at the intent and what actually happened in the scenario, you know, there's a little bit of leeway there. And so we've been able to negotiate diversions in a couple of cases that probably wouldn't have typically been divertible offenses on paper, but by connecting people to the appropriate developmental service support, so we can say, you know, this person now has staff who are able to support them in the community. In some cases, it's because somebody's got some mental health issues in addition to their developmental disability that are untreated. So we're able to connect them to mental health supports where, you know, once somebody gets on their medication and they get the proper treatment, that their risk level is significantly reduced. So we've actually had some really good examples of working not just with developmental services, but bringing multiple service systems together and wrapping services around an individual. And, you know, that goes to a lot of the folks that we're seeing particularly land in court. It's because they've not been connected to developmental services previously. You know, they've fallen through the cracks. Their first sort of entry to the system is through the, you know, the courtroom doors. They're highlighted that somebody says, gee, and I think this person might have a developmental disability, and we're quickly able to connect them to the DSO, determine they're eligible, start getting them connected to services where a lot of these individuals have never been connected before, and that's actually in part what led to their vulnerability that's landed them in trouble at this point.
Exactly. Thank you. Thanks very much. I'm going to see if we have any online questions coming in at this point. Okay, there's like a whole page of online questions. All right, so I'm going to just read the question out, and then I'm going to ask any one of our panelists if they want to volunteer to take a crack at answering it, and hopefully it will lead into some discussion. I think we have about 15 minutes left on our time slot for the webinar, so we do have time to do 2 or 3 questions, hopefully. So the first question, what does rollout of the toolkit look like for corrections? Will all frontline staff be mandated to receive the tool and be given training on how to use it? And will the videos be included in this process? Now we're all staring at each other. I'm not sure that we've actually memorized the details of the rollout for every partner. I am going to say we've had, this is Barb from MCSS again, we've had about 4 discussions on the bigger provincial rollout of the tool and the toolkit. I don't think we're looking at mandated receipt and training, but we are looking at the broadest possible distribution across the system. And I'm just going to ask folks if they want to add any more details to that in terms of what we've set up.
The only thing I would suggest is if you can find a way to almost cross-ministry train, I think that would just be, that's a great idea. And the reason I'm saying that is my detachment was one of the lucky police services to be able to be the part of the pilot project. And Lisa and Jessica, cheapers. Lisa and Jessica came in and they delivered this presentation. And the neat part about it was we also, I mean, everybody has their own set of struggles and their own set of challenges. The neat part about this training was that we were able to understand what Lisa's challenges are and what Jessica's challenges were, and then Jessica and Lisa could understand our challenges and successes as well as, well, we do this, well, how about you guys, you do that. And so having that cross-training allowed us to break down some of the silos of excellence, as the term has been coined, and gives a better understanding and a broader understanding of what services are out there. Because if an officer says, you know, I had this situation and I didn't know where to turn, then it was Jessica who said, well, all you have to do is call us, or all you have to do is call so-and-so. So you have that, when you have that cross information, it just expands everybody's knowledge, and what you're going to be doing is you're going to have better support and service for our clients.
I'd like to respond. Katie Ullman here. I can't speak to what corrections decision is on it. I just came back actually from doing a 15-month comment there working on the mental health strategy. And I do know that the toolkit was shared and there is a very strong awareness of it. It was suggested by myself and by others that it would be very useful for training for both correctional officers and probation parole officers. There are many changes happening right now in corrections, so this may be a great time to leverage those changes to use the toolkit, but I can't actually speak to what that decision is.
I think we're still finalizing it's Barb again, we're sort of finalizing the details of rollout, and there's a lot of consciousness of the fact that we can't really grab a bunch of corrections officers and grab them into a room for a day and walk them through this in depth. That's a commitment of resources and time that probably isn't practical. But we're also really conscious of the fact that if we just send out a massive email and say, hey, here's a great toolkit, go forth, people are highly unlikely to actually start accessing it. So we have a kind of multifaceted approach on it.
Yeah, and to add to that, it's Lisa speaking. I think one of the things that we've talked about as part of this project is that I think it's most important that people just know where to go for this resource when they need it. I think what we'll find is just the awareness that it's there. I think perhaps embedding it in training at one point is great, but then it's easily forgotten. I think it's better for those working in the field to just know where it is to go to when they need it. Because we recognize that, even though people with developmental disabilities are overrepresented in the justice system, they're not the majority of folks going through the justice system. So it's just being able to know where these resources are when you need them.
Yeah. And I think the first phase of rollout is really distribution, and then embedding it into sort of existing training materials, existing training venues, any kind of regular update stuff, conferences, et cetera. And then over the next several months, hoping to continue to kind of raise the profile. And of course, also to keep seeking feedback, because we've gotten feedback today, even that we didn't have when we were doing pilot testing, and we see that as a sort of continuous iteration.
To add to that, we've actually added some material since I first launched it. I know we've added information about report on to the document, and that's in part the advantage of having it as an interactive PDF is that we can change it. It's a living document. It's not stagnant. And within the document too, we've included a lot of web links, and that way again, so that the information stays current and we're not directing people to outdated information.
Cool. We have a second question here for the panel. What efforts could we take to educate the judiciary, judges, regarding mental health and the lingo which our clientele may have difficulty understanding? Can we simplify the process and the language for individuals that struggle with developmental disabilities and mental illness? Now, you guys have spoken actually quite a bit to this, and communications is one of the focuses on the toolkits, but I think this question is interesting because it's talking about the flip side. Can we encourage correction and justice sector folks, and it says here specifically judges, to simplify and adopt more plain language?
Well, actually, funnily enough, because of the HSJCC work, this coming fall, I'm speaking on a panel for judges, training panel. They spent a couple of days training on specifically on sentencing and incarceration issues. So I will definitely be talking about the toolkit. I have a couple of things I want to talk about. Mental health is usually front and center, what they want to address. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, mental health is often used as the umbrella for all vulnerabilities without really parsing what other vulnerabilities there are. So certainly that is something that I was going to talk about the toolkit when I speak this coming fall to the judges, and that's a start. I mean, I think in terms of their training platform, they have their own ongoing education, so it's always a matter of inserting ourselves or our educational platforms into their agenda as well.
And we're working with the Ministry of Attorney General on some of that as well, among the training platforms that we're looking to get ourselves into. Other commentary on this? No? Any other questions at this point? Just looking in the online chat. All right. Any last words? Anybody want to do a quick wrap-up, final sales pitch?
Well, I think, I just wanted to sort of tell a quick story of what happened while we were working on this project that really, I know for the police officers we were working with for filming the video, became apparent to them, the need. We often talk about the vulnerabilities and of people with developmental disabilities, but when we were doing the filming of the videos, because we didn't script, we just gave scenarios, our officers involved actually had a firsthand glimpse of how vulnerable people with developmental disabilities can be to persuasion. And so we were filming one segment, and it started around, the scenario was your bicycle's been stolen, and you're reporting it to the police. So in this case, the individual was a victim, not an offender. And so we started the taping, and, the first version, the individual said, well, yes, my bicycle was stolen. And the officer said, was it locked up? Yes. Okay, where was it stolen from? My front yard. And they said, okay, did you see the guy who stole it? No. Well, then they had to stop filming because there was an issue with the taping. So they said, oh, we have to do a second take. When they went back the second time, they asked the very same questions, but the individual felt like he perhaps hadn't given the right answers the first time. So it went from, was your bike stolen? Yes. Where was it stolen from? My backyard. Was it locked up? No. Did you see the individual who stole it? Yes, he had a mask and he was carrying a gun. And it was, the officer said, wow, we really now understand how when we repeatedly question somebody and, we think that we're trying to dig deeper into the story, we could actually be caught, persuading them to embellish unwittingly. So it was really an eye-opener for the officers just doing the videotaping, because they got to see firsthand the impact of, some of their strategies for interviewing and how they might not work with someone.
That's really illustrative. We just got one more question here, so we do have a few minutes. We're going to discuss this one a bit, which is a good question. As a behavioral consultant for adults with dual diagnosis, I have a lot of clients that struggle with navigating the justice system. Dual diagnosis in this context is both a developmental disability and a mental health diagnosis. So how can we help behavioral consultants? How can we help support this initiative? Thoughts on that?
I would suggest it's an awareness. It's Lisa speaking. That again, it's awareness. Making those that you're working within the justice system aware of these resources. Suggesting be aware yourself of the tips and strategies included in the toolkit and be able to promote those. And I think that's probably the best way. And I think, when we've talked about awareness, if you're part of the HSJCC network, whether you're on a local committee, I know I've presented this presentation at a number of our local HSJCCs. But again, it's just trying to get as many people as possible from different sectors aware of the resources so they know that they're there.
Thank you. Any other commentary?
Just one last comment, which is an important one. It's not the last one, really, that when we talk about vulnerable clients, we have much more awareness now of, racial profiling and the issues of our Indigenous clients. I'm an Indigenous person, so working in an urban center with a large number of Indigenous clients. So those who are visibly belong to a group that is racialized and are struggling with some of the demands of the justice system while having a developmental disability, perhaps mental health issues and other issues, are doubly or triply disadvantaged in terms of dealing with the justice system, and that is something really that we have to be very aware of.
Great. Thanks very much for that. One more question. Is there specific guidance in the toolkit on the unique challenges for individuals with intersectional identities? So exactly to your point, we really actually didn't set that up that way. That question just came in as you were speaking, Katie. So Indigenous, racialized, women as well. Any content in there?
So there's certainly content. We did seek input from Indigenous populations around this, and one of the things we were told is that, really the toolkit is applicable regardless of race or, your background, that the work was, I think, it's applicable right across the board. I think even as Katie suggested, we've even been told that it's quite applicable even to seniors, to those with mental health issues. I think a lot of the content in the toolkit is broader than developmental disabilities. We did also address the issue of stigma. That's something that, we haven't talked about, but, often individuals with a developmental disability will not self-identify. The stigma of having a developmental disability is far greater than the stigma of having mental illness or, of, having an addiction. We've worked with clients where we were allowed to talk about their mental health. We were allowed to talk about their addiction issues, but heaven forbid we were not to discuss that they had a developmental disability. They've worked very hard their whole life to fit in and be, part of their peer group, and so they definitely don't want to be stigmatized as having a developmental disability.
I think we're pretty much out of time. We seem to have addressed most of the questions that have come in, but we will make sure to follow up with answers to any of your questions that may come in now or in response to the posting of the webinar recording and the follow-up materials. And we'll also be looking to post additional information on the HSJCC website. At the end of the presentation here today, there's contact information for Lisa. So she'll be channeling inquiries and questions appropriately. She's not necessarily going to, become best friends with everyone who emails her, but she'll be channeling them. And I want to thank everyone who joined in on the webinar. I trust it's been an informative experience and that you walk away with information and tools that can help you in the important work that you do every day supporting these vulnerable populations in our communities. Special thanks to Lisa Holmes, Sharon Brown, and Katie Almond for all their support and for taking the time to talk about their experiences and answer some questions today on this project. You may be hearing more about the project in the near future. You will be hearing more about this project as we keep working with partner ministries to push out and promote the resources across the province. I spoke to Lisa's email at the end of the slide deck, and I think that's it for us. So thanks for your participation once more. Thanks for taking time out of your day to listen in, and have a great afternoon.